The episode begins with a woman and her mother at a riverbank. The old woman, the eponymous grandmother, wants some eels, but her daughter tells her that there are none and they've got enough fish to be free for the ritual for her birthday. I believe it's a Buddhist ritual that the grandmother wants to follow perfectly, but without the eels, it probably feels half-hearted. The younger woman gets a call in the middle of their conversation, and she turns away to take it. When she looks back, her mother's gone, and only her footwear remains. Manta returns home without her mother, making her daughter Nulek super frustrated. So much so that she ends up throwing a bowl at her, a tantrum of sorts, because the kid feels like she's been raised by her grandmother and she doesn't really care for Manta. She even calls her by her first name and berates her for not knowing how to look after her own mother. Nulek spends most of her time texting a friend named Alice online about how she doesn't like her mother and wishes she would die. When she says her grandmother is missing, she gets a reply saying that she might be playing with her, like a game of hide and seek. On the other hand, Nulek also notices that there's a stranger who keeps peeping into their house, a pervert to make matters worse for her. I'm not sure why we see a bunch of missing pet posters in this episode. Maybe we're supposed to believe the entity has been in the area for a long time. I don't know, but I do know that it's always the animals that pay the price of death first in horror, which I absolutely hate. In the meantime, Manta has no choice but to resort to religious prayer to find her mother. She takes a pair of her shoes and visits a shaman. The shaman tells her to tie up her mother's favorite pair of shoes and place them on her mother's bed because it'll help guide her back home. But if Manta's thoughts are distracted, then it is likely that she'll invite something else into her home. So she should make sure it's her mother she's thinking about on the drive home. 3 days later, Nulek's grandmother comes back home. The next day, when Manta's gone off to work, Nulek looks for her grandmother. She's been texting Alice about how she was mad at her mother and deserves someone better. When she goes to her grandmother's room, she finds a bowl under the bed that's moving on its own. When she tries to go near it, something climbs onto her arm and she freaks out and rushes back to her room. However, hiding under her sheets, she turns around to find a ghastly face looking straight at her. When she scrambles off the bed, the sheets rise as if there's someone under it. When Nulek removes the sheets, it's her grandmother, and Nulek feels relieved. I suppose Nulek hates her mother because she feels abandoned by her. She doesn't see how hard her single mother worked to give her the things she has. There's definitely hostility there. But I also think Nulek thinks her mother is very negligent. At home, Nulek is all smiles with her grandmother and asks her to sing her a lullaby. Manta gets a terrifying call at work. Her mother's body has been found on the riverbank, which means whatever the thing is at home isn't her mom. At home, Nulek gets terrified when her grandmother turns into a monster and vomits up a handful of eels on her. I guess this is some sort of foreshadowing. Nulek tries to run away, and her grandmother tells her that they've got to play hide and seek, but if she finds her, she'll stab her with a knife. Nulek hides in the kitchen, but is found because, obviously, it's not her grandmother, but an evil entity. Nulek tries to make her way out of the house through her bathroom window after her grandma slices her ear off. She gets stuck on the glass at the base of the window, but somehow jumps out just in time with a gaping wound on her stomach. I've got to admit this scene was way too dragged out and didn't work at all. Eventually, Nulek ends up on the street and gets hit by a car. But the person who steps out of the car is actually Manta, and she picks up a pair of shoes that are tied up off the road and puts them in her back seat to reveal that they have a picture of Nulek on them. In Dear Granny's ending, the episode does a quick rewind, and we learn that Nulek's dead too. So the bowl from the first bit flew across the room on its own. Also, the perverted neighbor? He thinks he's a paranormal investigator making a video about the haunted house that Manta lives in. He reveals that Manta lives alone in the house, and that her daughter died after running away and getting hit by a car. But the grandma shows up in the pervert's house along with Nulek, and his neck is slashed. Now, I can't tell if Nulek and her grandmother were haunted by an entity, and then they ended up killing the other guy to join the same cult. But, in all seriousness, I think this episode focuses on family relationships and how your thoughts can manifest into reality in the wrong way. Nulek had all these negative thoughts about her mother, which is why she ended up running away, which led to her death, or worse, her becoming an evil spirit. But I suppose the same thing can apply to her grandmother, because Mantha was getting tired of looking after the old woman. The ritual they were doing at the beginning of the episode is a freeing ritual, so it's likely the grandmother wanted to simply free herself. Again, I don't know where I'm pulling these stories out of because the show didn't just give us an ambiguous ending, but a completely abandoned story that doesn't explain anything. We'd love to know your thoughts on the ending of Dear Granny and what theories you might have about Nulek. It's a very thin line between ambition and temptation, and it is impossible to figure out when one becomes another. Macbeth was an ambitious soldier, but his temptation made him a murderer. A similar thing happened with Pile. She was a simple woman who wanted to send her 6-year-old daughter Caillou to the best school in the locality, even though she didn't have the means to do so. In the end, it was Piel's ambition that led her into temptation. And I guess it is common knowledge that when you submit to the devil, death and despair follow. The very first frame of Viral Curse established the fact that Pell had desires like any other woman of her age, but she couldn't fulfill them because, being a single mother, she had to look after her daughter and provide her with the best life possible. And in order to do so, Pell had to curb her own dreams and desires. We don't know what exactly happened to her husband, and so we're left to assume that he either died or walked out of the family. In the opening scene, we saw Pell trying a new dress, and I feel this purple dress doesn't belong to her. It was one of the customers in Pell's laundromat who had given it to her. Now, it was evident that Pell had been struggling to pay the shop's rent. She was neck-deep in debt, yet she decided to enroll her daughter in one of the most expensive elementary schools, Triam Fudang Suksa. Her reason was simple. Play wanted to provide the best education for her daughter just like herself. But the question here was it necessary to go beyond one's means and ultimately become a slave of one's ambition? Well, you know the answer. Caillou was merely 6 years old, and even the most expensive education hadn't made a difference at this tender age. Yet parents often fall for that trap, right? The episode had a kind of meta-reference as we saw Peel watching the Terror Tuesday show on her mobile phone. A caller named Bao from Ang Thong narrated an incident to the radio host that had happened with her friend. Bao's friend was a single woman who took her young kid to a temple fair, where at the end of the night, the woman started screaming for help. Her kid was drowning in the water, but no one came for her help. In the end, the woman jumped into the water and found her kid dead. Later, the grieving mother revealed that a ghost took her kid away. She told people that her daughter had been playing with her sister when, in reality, she was a single child. So you see, Bo actually told the story of what was about to happen with Pell. But the purpose was to inject Pell with a sense of paranoia for the rest of the episode. And sometimes, even though something isn't happening in real life, our mind plays tricks on us and makes us believe that it is all real. My theory is that the wet monster doesn't exist. It's appropriately called a viral curse because, like an infection, you get it from others. And anyone who is going to listen to that podcast would pick up the curse, even though they didn't want to. Each one of us has a demon inside, and that monster is just waiting for its turn to come out. The monster we saw wasn't a real one either. Instead, it was Peel's mind playing tricks on her and making her imagine a scenario where a monster killed her child so she could live her life freely without any parental responsibilities. And the ending of the episode confirms that, as when Pell stepped into the neighbor's house, where the monster killed her kid, the monster could be seen wearing the same dress as Peel, which couldn't be a mere coincidence, right? It is without doubt that Peel was a responsible and dedicated mother, but she was a human too. And like all humans, she too had some desires. She couldn't acknowledge freely, because society would judge a single mother for that, won't it? Peel's mind, on the other hand, knew it all. I guess Peel was in a kind of moral dilemma when she was invited to her school friend's party. She didn't want to leave Kao alone at home, but she had no other option either. The best she could have done was to skip the party, and Pal might have done so if she hadn't found a gold necklace in one of the customers' clothes. Here you have to understand how evil works. The devil lures you into its trap by setting up baits for you and tries to lead you into temptation. And if you fall for that setup, then buddy, you are gone. Peely told Caillou that she would return the customer's necklace, but it was obvious she didn't have any intention to do so. Peel stole and sinned, making her the perfect prey for the devil. Also, the gold necklace completely changed Peel's demeanor. She wasn't stressed anymore, and she acted more proud than before. And I know financial security does that to you, but you have to question yourself. Is that money really yours? Things only got worse at Hong's party. Her friends suggested Poulet enroll Caillou into a boarding school so that she could do a full-time job abroad and live the life she always wanted. And if you hadn't noticed, there was a Sweden postcard on Peel's wardrobe at the beginning of the episode. She explains her desire to go abroad more than her friends. It was basically after Peel stole the necklace that she started listening to her desires more and more, and it was from that moment onwards that things became pretty eerie. Each and everything pointed at Peel's desires. For example, in Caillou's drawing, a woman dressed in red was standing beside an orange car, and the washing machine symbolized the loop she was stuck in. So, the question here is, did Peel kill her own daughter to free herself from the shackles? I guess yes. She did. There wasn't any ghost in the neighbor's house, which had been locked forever. It actually symbolized Peel's own desires that she had locked down in some corner of her mind as she wanted to portray herself as a responsible mother. But now that cloak was lifted. The neighbor's house was, in reality, the dark side of Peel's mind, and she herself opened the window to it. There, we saw a photo frame of Peel without Caillou by her side. The picture was quite contrary to the original frame which we saw at Pel's house. In the end, Pel tried to save her daughter from herself but couldn't. Pel, the monster, drowned her own daughter in the tub, as she couldn't think of anything else. The customer had given her 2 days' time to return the money she had stolen by pawning her necklace, and at this stressful moment, all Peel could think of was to give a bath to her daughter, who had been nagging her for a long time. Peel's landlord, Auntie Hom, found a leaking roof at her house, which implied that she would be the next victim of the wet monster, though I am not exactly sure why. I know Auntie Hom was a rude and cruel woman, but that wasn't the reason why the monster attacked Peel in the first place. Maybe the director Elisa Peen wanted to give a smart cliffhanger that only looks dumb on screen if you see it now. Nevertheless, as soon as Auntie Hom switched the TV on, she heard Peel's voice, who told Terror Tuesday's host that the ghost was still following her. Now, I don't think it was the monster, but Pel's own demon, because she let her desires take over her mind, and now a part of her conscience feels guilty about it. And it would most likely haunt her forever, because the woman killed her own daughter just to get free from her responsibilities. And yes, she blamed the host for playing such horror stories on the show, which had been infecting people's minds and ruining their lives. And if Auntie Hom is really the next target, then I hope the ghost haunts her well. She is the one who really deserves it.